get a recording of it so that you can people can look at it later if they need to join in. And I'm going to share my screen to that first slide, and you just let me know when we need to change things.
All right. So, Gerard, would you give me about a 5-minute warning?
Sure.
When we get near the end?
Yeah, I will, and I'm sure we'll get a little bit of interaction as we go through too. So we'll keep track on it.
Okay. So, Bertha and Charles, what would you like to get out of this session today?
Well, the title intrigued me, and so I'm just sort of open-minded about it. I don't have a specific agenda.
Okay.
And George, I actually missed it at the Power Summit, so I'm just here to learn. I'm a fairly new affiliate, so all the learning that I can get is a benefit to me. So I'm here to learn from your experience, and I thank you.
All right. Okay. So, have you had any clients yet, Bertha?
No solid clients yet.
Okay. And what did you do in prior life?
I was in telecom. I was in Sprint, and
Okay.
I worked there for 18 years in the retention department.
Okay. And Charles, what's your client mix like?
Well, I've been in the network about 6 years. I probably, at this point, have about 4 active clients. I'm getting ready to write a proposal for Thursday, so I thought this might be food for thought.
All right. So, of your clients that you've had, what are the outcomes that they wanted to get?
It varies. For myself, I mean, let's see. I've had partnerships need to come to a meeting of the minds for how to go forward. I had one customer they've lost their credit line and needed to put together the first business plan to get another one. People have wanted sales, get better performance in sales. See that kind of result.
Okay. So 2 partners, a meeting of the minds, and to plan.
It was actually 3, but okay.
Okay. And what were the issues that led them to contact you?
Through networking and introducing who I am and what I do.
But what issues that they having that they wanted your assistance with?
Well, in terms of the 3 partners, there was concern about a division of labor between the 3 of them, and they had thoughts of a succession plan, but they realized to do the succession plan, they needed to grow their revenue a good 15–20% to do it.
Mm-hmm. And why is it that they needed to grow their revenue?
They felt that there was value to the business. It was a rather unique business, but they needed to be able to hire a general manager to, they had some good skilled employees, but they didn't have any internal management talent.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to get the revenue to the point where they could both recover the ongoing income they wanted to get out of the business, plus have a general manager.
Mm-hmm. I'm making notes here, so that's why I'm. And how much did they need to grow their revenue to?
The company was currently around, it was about a $1.5 million operation, and they probably needed to get it up to 2.
Okay. So how was the present situation of the business affecting them presently, or at the present time? How was the lesser revenue and not having a general manager affecting each one of them personally?
Well, one of them was assuming an awful lot. You know, in the book Traction, there's an exercise where you have a box for each functional area. And you have one person to each box. This person had all the boxes.
Oh, okay.
And the other, it's a creative company. They do video and stuff like that. But they also have a legal segment, which is very successful and very unique. Excuse me. So I mean, they could go fairly. They could be fairly complacent, and the business would keep going. The person that was being overworked saw the day that she wanted to get out of business. And so the other partners either had to start lifting their weight or they needed to do something different.
So how was her carrying most of the load affecting her personally?
She was getting stressed. She was getting burned out. She is also a creative person, and she was not happy with the fact that all of her time was consumed with management and she couldn't do any creative work. And she had a strong goal to get back to doing some of that soon.
So what would happen if she hadn't shifted some of the workload? What would have happened?
There would have been no change, and there would have been a big sequence somewhere down the road in that the business probably wouldn't have any market value to sell, and some of them were not prepared to really retire or even think about retirement. So it would have been a real unsettling if this business doesn't have a graceful succession.
So if the business didn't succeed, their retirement would have been in jeopardy.
Three partners. The one that was overworked is probably prepared to retire, but the other partners aren't. So sort of up and leave would be very, very bad for the two remaining partners.
Okay. And would she have quit, do you think?
Remains to be seen. I'm talking to her right now about going into an executive coaching relationship to help bring change.
So when you talked about growing the business, you were thinking in terms of somewhere around an additional $500,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so over about a 3-year period, that would have translated into about $1.5 million, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if you were in their shoes and you were going to charge them $100,000, do you think they would have thought that was fair?
This particular group, no.
Okay. All right.
would be sticker shock for this particular group. But I understand where you're going. I mean, there's a lot of value, and it's funny you bring that up because this particular group, I was trying to lead them through the same type of analysis about what the benefit was.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, even though this one person wanted to get out of the business, had never thought about what the value of a plan would be. It was an eye-opening experience even to go down that thought path.
Okay. So how did you set the fee?
I based it on cost plus.
Okay.
The initial project was a strategic plan, and so I allocated 20 hours and material and a profit margin. That's how I set the price.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for sharing that, Charles. And what I essentially did was just we just walked through the process and the model that I used, and I'm a little bit surprised that they weren't willing to invest $1 to get four back, but I guess that does happen sometimes. So the sequence of doing this process is to walk through the goal planning sheet and to start by getting a clear definition of what the goal is: specific, measurable, quantifiable, and time-bounded. And to get the numbers out on the table. And then once that's identified, to go into the rewards and surface at least 5 rewards. And then after the rewards are surfaced is to go to the obstacles and identify at least 5 or more obstacles. Somewhere around 7 or 8 is usually the best. What you really want to do is to get to the root cause of what's holding them back, and then from there shift to the consequences. And when you shift to the consequences, you ask a series of questions to get to the pain. And because getting to the pain is crucial, because nearly all buying decisions, or most all buying decisions for that matter, according to the research, are based on emotion and then come back and justify with logic. So as is on the screen here, the 2 brains, the primal brain is the subconscious brain, and the rational brain is the conscious brain or the logical brain. And particularly in organization settings, it's important to get the logic out, to get the numbers backed out, because most of the time in business situations, it has to be based on, or there has to be an ROI generally, or some kind of logic behind the buying decision, particularly in larger corporations that have relatively sophisticated approval processes and require showing the benefit in quantifiable numbers. So as I've worked through this, then in the questioning, as we're taught in process excellence, is to use 5 whys to get to the root cause. And in this particular instance, I interlaced it with asking why questions, but more often ask what questions, like what's important, or what was the benefit of that, what would that do for them, what was the value of that. And the reason for that is that.
Can I ask a question, George?
Sure.
What for your practice? What percentage of your customers are corporate as opposed to family?
Probably 30% corporate, and the others would be family-owned businesses.
Right. Okay.
So. And a lot of the smaller businesses, well, I would call your business or your example here, I would put that in the family-owned category for me.
Absolutely.
And, you know, they're feeling some kind of stress in the partners. So
one of the comments you made about ROI is the reason they balk is also because what's the cash flow of the business? I mean, this is the type of business they can't walk into a bank and get, you know, $100,000 loan.
mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they're looking at cash flow to fund this. Although, even if they see the ROI, one of the constraints for them is how much cash can they generate in a given period.
Okay, and we'll talk about that at the end then. That happens a lot, particularly in the businesses of under, say, 10 million in sales. The cash flow is a strain. So and then going on with that to get out the motion and then come back and have numbers to be able to justify it with logic. And then the next thing that you saw is that once I got the dollar value, I asked him what it would be like in 3 years, and that was $1.5 million, and then came back and said, you know, would it be fair if our fee was the 1 year's $100,000 or 25% of 1 year's gain. And so then the next step that wasn't modeled in this is once that comes out, I move to the close. And in the close, I say something like, so Charles, by working together, if we were able to increase the revenue by $500,000 a year, and by working together, we would be able to accomplish that. What would your next steps be?
That's a good question.
Okay.
That's a good question. I'm going to write that one down.
Okay. So by working together, we can accomplish that.
Yep.
When do you want to start? And my schedule is I'm available Tuesdays and Fridays, and between 8 and noon, and Thursdays and Tuesdays 1 to 5, and excepting Wednesdays, I'm available any evening after 5 p.m. What works best for you?
Gotcha.
So that's essentially it. So going on to the next slide, Gerard, which is the iceberg. So the conscious brain is what we see at the tip of the iceberg, at what's above the water line, the light, the rewards, and then the need that can be somewhat below and somewhat above the water line. consequences, and when we drive down the 5 whys or the 5 whats or more, is to surface consequences, the pain, the fear, and the anxiety. And people, again, people make decisions at the subconscious level and justify it at the conscious level. And said another way, as I said before, people buy on emotion and justify on logic. So the primal brain makes a decision, and in this picture, the rational brain justifies it. A couple of things that have been pointed out in our past sessions is that Doug Brown, the sales doctor, has pointed out several times that consequences cause people to take action. Psychologist David Muchler and the co-author of Fail-Safe Leadership also says consequences or loss or pain drive urgency. And then some additional information from Doug is that 20% of people are possibility driven, are more motivated to attain a gain. 80% of people are necessity driven and are motivated to avoid a loss. And one of the things that I learned from Rich Nash, whose practice was working with salespeople, he required people that wanted him to coach them to email him a goal that was measured in dollars before he agreed to work with them. So that's another way of getting the dollars out on the table. So a couple other points in this methodology is Jim Godtraw and Ray Overdorf has stressed over the years, it's very important to have a mental model to peel the onion, to get at the heart or the root causes of a person's need, and to get the person to articulate that. Ray has often said, we might know in a minute and a half exactly what's wrong and what's they needed, but that really doesn't count until they articulate it, until we get them to say what that need is, what that consequence is, or the fear or the pain or the anxiety that they're experiencing. So the mental model, whatever it is, be it the goal planning sheet or another model, to peel those layers and to get down to the heart of what's really hurting them. And then the next illustration is the scale. And so this just is graphically showing what the value of the investment in our services are. For every dollar, as I mentioned before, that they're paying us, they're getting $4 back in this 25% methodology. To a larger business that is focused on measurable ROI, that's a 75% return on investment. And typically this will pay off in about 15 months. So, or less. So that's pretty short payback. I said that wrong. It pays back in less than a year. It's usually 17 weeks rather than 15 months. So usually the payback is 17 weeks. Any questions at this point?
George, I have a question. This is Bertha.
Yes, Bertha.
I had a suspect that I sat with, and I met him at a new member orientation for a Chamber of Commerce, and he was an ambassador. And we kind of broke off into small groups when we did our kind of elevator speeches and talked about who we were and what we do. And at the end, he tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know what? I need an accountability coach. I need to sit with someone. And I said, well, let's talk. This was 2 weeks prior to the holiday, so it's 3 weeks ago now. And I said, well, my calendar is really freed up after the holiday. That's when I have more time, so we can talk then. And he said, no, it has to be before the holiday. So the urgency was already set. So when I sat and talked to him to find out what's going on, what are your goals? What do you want to do? What is it that you're doing now? I found out that he had so many different balls in the air. He was running a business last year, and it's like a stretch. His business is called Stretch and Flex, and he does fitness for corporate clients. So he goes into the corporate office and he does these stretching exercises for the employees. And he was working with a major hospital in New York City, and all of a sudden he lost his contract right away. And I don't want to be long, but to get to the point of it, he was at about $2 million last year, and this year he's $300K in the hole, and he's living off of loans after loans after loans in order to meet these next goals that he has, and of course to keep his family afloat. So I went through a goal planning sheet, and we talked about, what is it that you'd like to see? What are your goals? Where do you see yourself? What is it that how do you want to grow that? How do you want to get there? We talked about what are the obstacles in your way. And then we eventually got to, well, what happens if it doesn't change? What happens if we don't work together? And at the end of it all, it kind of flipped on me. So I don't know if my questioning was wrong or what happened, but he was saying, well, how are you qualified? And I don't know if I can work with you. And so it turned from subconscious to conscious.
Okay.
And he ended up wanting to barter instead of do business. So don't know what happened there, but I did go through a goal planning sheet, and I took down some of the questions and some of the tips that you just gave. I think I did about 5 questions or so. We went through rewards, but I went through the goal planning sheet as it is. So I don't know if that's something in your experience where that's happened, where it goes, you're talking about the value, you talk about the return on investment. We have the numbers right in front of us, what he needs to do in order to stay afloat, keep a building open that he has. He has a storefront that's going to launch in January at the mall for some kind of I forgot what it's called, some kind of fitness challenge that he has for 90 days, a 90-day challenge. But at the end of it, he didn't see the value in me.
Gerard, what are your thoughts?
Well, I hate this answer, but I'll give it to you. There are some times that it's not worth chasing somebody that has no ability to get the resources together for you. And
right.
That may be a concern here, although you say he's living off of loans and things along those lines. My first concern is he willing to make more investment into his business to get to that next level and that goal-setting ability? I don't know the answer to that question. If the answer to that is yes, well then, okay, it's a different discussion. If the answer to that question is no, I need to plug I had a $2 million surplus last year, $2 million business last year. I need to put my head down and plug on through because I know I can do it. Then the ability to actually ask for the help or pay for the help may not exist. So that's always my first concern: is there a true prospect in terms of the ability to access the money?
Right.
Another
right. And
another question I would have asked is, how long can he last?
good question.
And if you don't think of it at the time, Bertha, it is often very effective just to shoot that question back to him by an email. At the rate you're going, how long can you last?
Mm-hmm.
In addition to what Gerard said, do you think perhaps that was a negotiating tactic he was using?
Mm-hmm. Probably. Maybe. Because he's investing in another networking group that he invited me to. And he said, well, I'm a Tony Robbins coach. I didn't finish the process, but where are you? And you're new, so how can I trust you? So these are some of the things that he was getting at.
Mhm.
Boy, that's a red flag to me. In the sense that Tony Robbins is all about getting rich. And if he's made that investment and is in this situation, he has to get through a lot of arms before he's going to invest more.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
This is easier to say when a person's been doing this for 25 years or so versus the first year in business. But sometimes we need to be prepared just to walk away.
Right.
And do it in such a way that the door is open if they want to come back. But just like any sales call, that some hit and some don't. And I can understand cash flow is pretty important, but sometimes just having that independent mindset is effective. I have one guy that right now that I've been working with, a guy that owns a printing company and wants to retire in 5 years. And just asking him for the preliminary information is taking an inordinate amount of time. And I concluded the other day that I just can't work with him because he's just going to be a time drain. And his business is not that big where I'm going to make that much money anyway. So it just, sometimes we have to be prepared for that. A couple of things that came out of both of your conversations is on the examples. The first example is more of a corporate kind of client, and but this would somewhat parallel your situation, Charles, and just walking through that. If the benefit is $400,000, the annual benefit is $400,000. Ours is 25% of that. The client pays us $100,000. So the net benefit to them is $300,000, or as I said earlier, 75% return on investment. And that would pay back $6,000 per week. And the weeks to pay back would be 16.7 weeks, and there's a calculation error in the months. But so, what often we do in situations like both of you have described, where cash flow is an issue, is we stage the payments to us with the cash flow. In other words, pace them to the cash flow. If they're going to get $6,000 a week back, they would pay us $3,000 per week, for example, or whatever number would make sense. However, there's something very important to that, is there needs to be upfront money so that they have some skin in the game. And so that our costs are covered with that upfront money. Our out-of-pocket costs are covered with that upfront money. And in my particular case, I'm always using some assessments like Intermetrics, often 360s, sometimes emotional quotient, and always using some process from trusted advisors, either usually it's team leadership, or perhaps it's leadership, and many times it is process improvement, variance reduction, and cycle time reduction. So there's there's an investment with all of that, as well as whatever community expenses is required. We found over the years, if they don't have skin in the game, they generally will not do what's needed to do, what they need to do to get the outcome that they want to get.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question though? You're spreading this over 16 weeks. And the problem is whether they get the result or not is up to them. And what situations where they don't get the result?
Well, they're still obligated to pay us.
Right. Okay.
So one thing that helps that is to take credit cards so that you can charge them every week.
Do you ever have them want to cancel prematurely?
Yeah, it happens once in a while.
Okay.
And when that happens, Charles, I'm probably pretty disgusted, or I have been pretty disgusted with them, and relieved that they came to that conclusion.
Right.
So,
Hey, George, can I ask you a real quick question? Because this model, I've talked about obviously with other affiliates and seen in other ways. And I want to say it was Herdlinger, although it could have been Brown. It doesn't really matter. In some of these types of situations, they may make some kind of guarantee. Obviously, to piggyback on Charles's question there, it's impossible to guarantee results because you're not the one doing the work. They are. They have to do it. If they don't do any work, then they're not going to see any results, obviously. That being said, do you do any kind of guarantee that they're satisfied with you after a certain amount of time or anything along those lines to do any kind of stress reliever from the buying to prevent some buying remorse?
once in a while, Gerard, I've said, if it comes to a point where you're not happy with me or I'm having difficulty with you, any of us can cancel with advance notice to the others. So a week or 30 days, whatever makes sense.
Okay.
And then if they haven't paid enough money, then set up something where I'll be compensated for my time.
I mean, one of the nice things there, as long as you are getting a chunk of that up front, on the front end, that does allow for that to happen. Obviously, a lot less likely, I assume.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
And if we were supposed to get, say, $6,000 a week, and I've got 10 weeks invested, then they owe me, in addition to whatever they put up front, then they owe me the difference to get to $60,000.
Okay.
And then I covered putting on cash flow basis, and we clarified that again with Gerard's question, clarified that more with Gerard's question. The next example is just an example of when we're asked to coach an employee. And if in this example, I'm assuming the person is a higher level, making $125,000 a year. To coach that person is the $31,250 as shown there. Now, if they terminate that person, their option is either coach the person or terminate him. If they terminate the person and they replace the person without a recruiter, it's going to cost them about $125,000, and so 62 or 5% of their salary to replace them, and be $62.50, and the weeks to pay back if our fee is the $31,250 is 5 weeks, as shown here. With a recruiter, assuming a recruiter is going to charge 25% of the person's salary, then the replacement cost is $31,000, as shown here, and the weeks to pay back is 1. Any questions or comments about that?
Could you repeat that scenario, please, George?
Oh, let's see. Can we go to, yeah. The example is there. If they terminate the person and the person makes $125,000, the rule of thumb is the cost to replace an employee is 5% of their annual salary.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would equal $6,250. Our fee would be $31,250, and the division there would be 5 weeks to pay back. That's if the company did the recruitment itself. The right-hand column is if they use a recruiter, and the recruiter charges 25%, which is somewhere 20 to 30% is typical, I think, at least what we encounter here on the West Coast. And so the replacement cost is $32,000 in round numbers, and pays back in a month.
Got it. Thank you. Okay.
Are these people, though, that are performance issues, or are these like stars? I mean, who do you target with this?
Target above $100,000, and I would say most of the coaching that I do is with people that are considered stars, people that they're trying to fast track, and usually the person has a few things that need to be strengthened. The last call I got was with the VP of a technology company, and she had issues with managing her team, leading her team. There was a lot of friction, a lot of complaining, and people were going to leave. And so the CEO said that he would invest in her. He saw enough potential in her that he was willing to pay the money to have her coach. And the one thing we did there is we used a 360, and that's how we were able to give her interim feedback on whether her performance was improving or not improving. And her issue was with her direct reports, was where she's having problems. She was getting along well and working well with her peers. But we also included in the 360 the peers to provide feedback so that she could have a broad perspective of how she was being perceived by people, as well as the CEO was also included in that.
Just a couple reactions is that usually in a high-tech company, if they have someone that high up, they're loath to replace them. That's hard. But the other way I might look at this is I worked most of my career in high-tech, and generally if we were paying somebody $125,000, we expected that person's results to result in like $500,000 of incremental revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like the benefits, even the value of that kind of employee is way beyond the salary. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business.
Yeah. And this gal was making $350,000.
Right.
And of course, you can imagine what her direct reports were making. So there was a pretty substantial loss if any of those people quit. I mean, they were all over $100,000, and probably, and most pretty close to 200 or slightly above. So.
Gotcha. Okay, well, the 25% is an interesting. That's an interesting model. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to justify it, and I think 25% replacement cost is actually, I think, modest in the sense that there's also termination costs these days, unemployment insurance and severance and whatnot, and you're also in this model. Like with the $6,000, you're assuming that the hiring manager's time is free. And it's not. I mean, the cost of hiring and firing very. Most people way underestimate what the cost of firing and hiring is. Yes,
it certainly does. And you brought up a good point. Just imagine a CEO with a direct report like this, what he's got to put up with handling issues that she's creating among her team. So.
Right. Good stuff.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Anything else we should talk about? Well, Bertha, Charles, and Gerard, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully this has been beneficial. And Gerard, a special thanks to you for getting all this together.
No problem at all, George. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it. Bertha, especially for you, I know, and that's not visible. You can get, I don't know if you were on before, but all the handouts that George was using are on the affiliate website. Check out the Learning Lab library so you guys can get copies of it there. And it's pretty good. So, George, thank you. I appreciate it. Everybody have a great week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
next
George.
week, we'll do another one next week. So hopefully we'll see you guys then.
Happy holidays. Bye.
So long.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.
Care.